Welcome to Insights. I'm Eric. Thanks for joining us. We're going to do a grains review. Just take a look at the major grain markets of corn, soybeans, and wheat. Just following up to the poll that we did, there's a lot of interest in the commodities in general within the following. I understand that there's a lot of people out there producing in this space. Some people are introducing themselves to it just due to the price increase alone. One of the things that we're probably, and this could be an assumption, but it's probably a safe one, is that the majority that's being introduced to this space who's been involved with it for years doesn't quite understand what's taking place. There's that this is not the setup that we've seen since 1990. This is not the setup that we've seen before since 1959. You're going to need a long database to understand what's taking place. We've talked about this before on the internet, which has been ridiculed, but that I don't really care about that. The internet doesn't really know much other than when it challenges their logic, they just get defensive, and that's just how human nature is. But we're here to talk about some of the possibilities. We're here to talk about the cycle. You can see this is a form of the evolution of the trade inside the matrix. This is the trends tab. This is what we do when we go over and go through reviews. But since we have ongoing reports for corn, soybeans, and wheat, I'm not going to dig into them in too much detail. You can go watch those reports. They're ongoing. There are a series of videos like this. We talk about what all these numbers mean. And a lot of people who subscribe to the matrix have done this long enough. They know what these numbers mean over time anyways. So we're not going to really talk about the setup and the nomenclature and why everything's late and why everything's highlighted red and what that means. That we want to keep this review relatively short. There's a lot of interest inside the grain sector. Corn, soybeans, and wheat have been up for 18 and 20 months down, ranging from 100% return on top, and we've had even higher. Wheat was up there, now it's come back down. They're just tagging out in and out between who's the leader at any given moment. It really depends on if you're a shorter term trader, understanding why soybeans is rallying, because this one is the only one that's a mid-cycle, where these are late and things of that nature. But we'll talk about more of those in report. What we want to talk about is the commodity cycle in general. I know there's a lot of focus on fundamental reports, on the government release of acreages and yields and exports and all of that. But what we are facing, and I'll probably try and introduce a few of the concepts and a few things that I'm even thinking about right now that I haven't put in. We are facing a unique transition. This has to do with a transition of the core economy away from the United States into another part of the world and the dollar that goes with it. What people are getting confused is that the rising dollar is actually a part of that transition, and they see it as being bearish commodities, yet commodities continue to rally with that. And there are certain things that are taking place that are going to make the commodities immune to even that dollar rally to some extent. But we're going to talk about that briefly. But what we want to do is we want to set up some of the news flow that's taking place. One of the things that I'm going to suggest here is that uh, the commodity rally in general is being, well, you want to say precipitated by the situation we saw within the COVID-19 lockdowns, restrictions, and everything else, which some of those things are just coming off. And you say, well, bloody hell, how's that all related to it? Well, anybody who's probably out there farming anything or doing anything probably knows exactly what happened when some of that stuff took place. Things shut down, the supply chains shut down. You can't have restricted movement and have things trucked around. So one of the things that we say is the COVID-19 kind of triggered this all off. Many people believe that was triggered off by it was a fluke of nature, and others don't. I mean, that's not what we're going to look into. Everyone has their own opinions, but this is not. What do we care about opinions? This is about business and making money. So it's just there. And that fractured the supply chain far more than people realize. And then after, and I probably put another line here, maybe put a few more. I would say that right after the lockdowns came out and coming out of it, then now we have the drumbeat of war that's taking place. Russia's the evil enemy, and perhaps it will expand beyond that. We're seeing all sorts of things that are a little bit odd. China's involved with this as well. Now we have sanctions. We have sanctions to stop Putin, as we all point the finger towards that. But the problem is Russia is a part of the global economy as well. They produce grain, they produce key inputs, they produce a lot of energy. When you start to crack down on that and the sanctions and restrict the flow of intellectual capital as physical items and physical capital, the supply chain that was fractured within COVID-19 and hasn't fully recovered and takes another hit. So war is creating another shock, first shock here, second shock here, and every day you can go through and see which European country or Western country or other places that are jumping on board sanctions, acting as if somehow that will stop the conflict in Ukraine. Again, that's a debate that other people can have. We have no interest in that, but I can only tell you what it's doing to the global economy and globalization. It's shutting things down. And perhaps it's coincidental, perhaps it's not an accident. The shock of the system is causing not only commodity prices and energy and production of food and all sorts of things starting to rise. Ships are being stuck in port as they can't unload them. We've also kicked the Russian banks for a large extent out of the SWIFT, which is the payment global system. Man, that's no accident either, I'm sure, but it has certain ramifications that are taking place. They can bend and go to a different system, but then if you can't set up payments, it makes things more difficult. It was a lot more convenient before all this happened. And if a government's intentions are to make things more convenient, well, they're not doing a good job, and then you have to wonder if that's all coincidence. If you see, then we have now recently, anyone who's putting two and two together, we have a lockdown from COVID in China, which then exacerbates the supply chain as well. And it's causing oil prices to demand, well, in China, maybe the oil prices are dropping, but demand to tumble. Economic activity is tumbling. And China has to know this, yet they're still doing this. These are questions that someone else can answer. I mean, we can only put two and two together and say, well, the net effect is another supply shock. And you see countries then are pulling in their own exports I mean, this is something that's recent, but our own exports of their critical commodities, which then takes supply off the market. These are all things that are influencing long-term trends. And here's corn's long-term trends. The green boxes are primary trends up, which you can see if we look at a very short period of time, and well then, wow, this rally is not very big. And some of the bigger rallies, I tossed over the rally in the Civil War dwarfs what's taking place. Wheat is the same thing. Wheat's got a big, rich history. I didn't pull it all the way back. It goes back longer than the computer has a record of it here, but I put a couple of boxes up, and you can see this uptick is nothing in comparison to what we've seen in the past. This green box can be long. It can be almost relatively continuous. These are all functions of like long-term trends that are pushing based on supply chain shocks, of which everything that comes out, nothing is being introduced that would alleviate any of the shocks. It just keeps hitting it while it's down. And perhaps it's a part of a plan, perhaps it's coincidence, but then in the end result, it's all the same in terms of these markets. Now, that doesn't mean that these markets are headed to the moon straight and may have a break within them. It's just that we're dealing with rallies here that you just can't study it. You can't take a look at cotton, for example, and study it through the 70s and understand what's going to take place here. There could be more. I mean, and there's huge rallies on record, and some of them were caused by a supply shock of war, which we have a supply shock of war and if it continues to extend and bring in more players, This is again, it's either just everyone likes war, or it's designed to hide something. And what could be that it's trying to hide? And I've introduced this before, and I should have probably put this in. I'm going to dig it out for us quickly here, and then I'm going to end this out. And I got to find the long-term chart here. It's got to be in the quarterlies. What we are trying to hide is, and I'm going to put a couple of them on, is a growing instability inside the West. This is total credit market debt to gross domestic product, or GDP, GNP in the past. It's the debt burden of the West, the U.S. This is the U.S. total credit market debt. As it rises, it's becoming unsustainable. It's becoming particularly unsustainable in the periphery economies like Japan and Europe and some of the smaller nations, which also have huge debt burdens as well. This can't be serviced with the existing income, and it's pretty pervasive. If I pull up another chart, you can see the debt burden across. This is total credit market debt. This is household domestic non-financial. This is total credit market debt, the one we saw here. This is the rest of the world. The fact is U.S. households are burdened with massive amounts of debt. They know this, so default is coming. This is a part of the crash and burn. Economies crash and burn and cleanse themselves, but it comes with default. And the fact is that during those periods, you have to point fingers. So whether or not you point the finger here, you point the finger there, there's some finger pointing that's going to take away with who created this situation, who allowed it to happen. U.S. citizens in general allowed this to happen because we didn't do anything about it. We voted for years with our head in the sand, and you can't look any further than that. But I can tell you, anyone who's running the show doesn't want the finger pointed at them, so they need distractions. They also need the distraction, and then they're trying to avoid the transition of power outside the United States, and it's going to move. The core currency has been the U.S. dollar for a while. It doesn't mean the core currency is going to, or the U.S. dollar is going to disappear, but they certainly have to devalue it. And as they do that, another currency devalued in another country or valued in another country is going to take over. And I'm telling you, that's not the plan. Those in power right now do not want to give up the right to have all the benefits of the core currency and the power and privileges that come with it. So there's a real battle going on, and this is what's dragging up the commodity sector. If confidence, which we've tracked down here, and I'm not going to dig into this, is right here, we're in a bear phase of confidence. And it's going to be a long one. And as it does so, things of physical nature, assets, and if it gets real bad, food stuff is going to act as a barter system, and I'm not suggesting that's what it's going to do. It's done it before in the history of the world, but the fact is that it's discounting all of these supply shocks that are taking place here, as well as reflecting the fact that confidence continues to deteriorate. So this is really the setup. I severely doubt that the majority understands what's taking place. All I can do is encourage you to watch these inside the matrix and follow them along, playing them by the book, waiting for resets, understanding what PTD1 and PTD2 means, understand the longer term cycles. I can only encourage the people then to dig in further and join the corn and soybeans and wheat reports that are ongoing. They are designed to parse through a lot of this, to understand things, to go through the seasonality, some of the cycles that are displayed here, the time cycle, the price cycle. These are all important. There's also energy builds inside of here. This goes well beyond the scope of this grains review, but we will talk about this further. I just wanted everyone to know that participated in the poll and was involved with this, that this is something that you're going to have to look at further. I can only encourage people to sign up and look at the matrix as it shows what's taking place longer term and participate in some of these reports if you really have a really detailed well, I'd say interest in some of these markets. Whether you have a farm or you're involved with production or you're a speculator here, you need to understand how far things can go, and you need to control your emotions, because you're just going to blindly chase, and you can't do that in markets that are accelerating to the upside. It is quite possible, if we look at some of the long-term trends for corn, for wheat, for cotton, there's all sorts of them we track. It's possible that it'll go well beyond what people's expectations are. This is not a forecast. It's just they're all menu of possibilities. This rally from here to here in corn, for example, it's just dwarfed by many of the big moves that we've seen in the past. Things that had shocks within them. Perhaps the shocks are different than today's setup and today's explanation. Perhaps today's explanation is unique, but the outcome is always the same. And you have to learn how to play it without emotion and play it by discipline. The only way to do that is through understanding of cycles of time, price, and energy right here. And those are the things we talk about. So thanks for participating in the poll. Thanks for, watching this video here today. If you have any questions, contact us. If not, I encourage you to join up on the matrix and join up on some of these reports. And as we push through something that could be absolutely historic in terms of what we see inside the West, the Western economies, what's headed towards us in terms of political change, things of that nature. They all show up in the markets well before the majority, which that's a concept of majority and minority. The majority ever figures out. That's the population. That's the herd. It's difficult stuff, and that's why we've decided to introduce some of this stuff as we head towards a period of significant change. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you guys real soon.